Please let me set on my timer. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. We think that the issue in the current status quo with politics is that people are become more and more apathetic, and people are participating much less, right? People who have the ability to vote feel more reluctant to vote, and furthermore, the idea of politics is becoming separate from people's day-to-day lives, right? They feel like things like healthcare, things like education is not something that's inherently tied within politics, and they've just given up on the entire system of voting, on the entire idea of democracy, right? That's not what we want. We think that requiring individuals to pass political general knowledge tests is going to further the idea of political participation from the people, right? We think that people are going to become even more reluctant. That's only going to worsen the current status quo. So what we want is that is first, we don't want any exams. Second model is that we support the increasing accessibility in voting, right? Understanding that increased areas and numbers of vote is a progress that only happened in recent status quo, right? For example, people in more rural areas are becoming able to vote and are able to see the transparency of their elections, right? But third model is that we support the education of political general knowledge in curriculums, right? But unlike OG's explanation of political knowledge as political parties and their past precedences, we think we're just going to give them genuinely political general knowledge that is, one, not time specific to the election period that is ongoing, but second of all, something that is useful to even citizens who do not wish to become elected officials, right? We think that these come in the principles of, first, the basic principles of democracy, second of all, the rights and responsibilities of citizens and elected officials, so that they know what their rights are and how they can, for example, ensure that their rights are exercised properly in the current status quo. But third of all, we're also going to teach them check and balance mechanisms, right? For example, one, how to report voter fraud, second, how to impeach elected officials if they ever do not stay true to their campaign promises, but third of all, the process of judicial reviews if you feel like there are unconstitutional and undemocratic laws that are being passed by the body of representatives, right? We think that this information and this education can happen in common society through other medias that the government might currently have, but this can also happen in schools, right? But before I go on to my case, several responses to OG, right? OG's entire strategy is telling you how standardization is important because harms of minimal exposure and harms of polarization, right? But the question then is the process, right? I don't think you can take their benefit for granted, given about how they never characterized what people will do upon getting the education that they need and the information that they have after these exams, right? Because one, they never explained to you how the education process will be like. Second of all, they also never told you why knowing something means that they're going to act upon it, right? Because that means that even in their current status quo, if there are boycotted people, if there are people who are going to vote for all the wrong politicians like Trump voters, they're still going to pass the test for the sake of passing the test. Doesn't mean they're going to properly exercise all these other things. But other responses will be integrated into my substantives, right? I'm going to have two substantives. First of all, regarding why accessibility isn't important and must not be traded off for the sake of good votes. Second of all, why people are still able to make good votes on the ground, why people still have that ability. On the first substantive regarding why accessibility is important. One, we think that the pillars of democracy includes representation of the people, right? Democracy has always been in favor of the majority, even if they're not as educated, even if they have political bias, right? But here's the thing though, why do we trust so much in a society when we can see that sometimes society makes the wrong mistakes, sometimes we don't feel comfortable in the society? Because people's opinions are able to change over the course of time, right? They change with one experience, second, they change with maturity, third, they change with the change of urgencies. For example, if in the past you only voted for the sake of economic advancement, then you recognize that there is a harm in climate change, you're going to vote for more environmentally friendly policies, you're going to vote for policies that are, for example, anti big oil companies, right? But fourth of all, we think that people's opinions are also able to change with following the global trends, right? So what this is telling you is that yes, we want progress, but we think that progress will only happen if it happens as a community as a whole, right? We don't want progress that only comes through the form of selected votes from what people we deem worthy of voting, right? Why is this so? First, because we need to make sure that there is still incentive to make sure that education is consistent, right? If you want, for example, people to vote for better and green technology, then you need to make sure that everyone understands the urgency of climate change and how we must tackle it as soon as possible. Second of all, this allows for more humane decisions, right? Because just because they're good in paper, just because they're good in science, doesn't mean that it's going to be a decision that's very kind to the most vulnerable of society, right? For example, whether or not you want to use a plot of land for scientific advancement when it can be used for the sake of protected tribes, for the sake of indigenous communities, and so on and so forth. Third of all, we think that this is a form of elitism that shuts out people and justifies shutting out like the most vulnerable in society from the most important decision making process within the community, right? But then what a bullet that they never try to bite as OG is regarding how this is an exam, this is a test, right? That means that tests are rigorous. That means that three things. First of all, it's too much effort for people who already have like so much things going on in their life, right? We're talking about poor people who has to juggle 2 to 3 jobs in a day. We're talking about people who have to take care of so many of their children all while working at the same time. We're talking about people who simply have no time for many other things, right? We think that this is only going to disincentivize those people from participating in politics at all. But second of all, that means that there are certainly people who are not going to pass these exams, right? There's going to be an amount of people who's not going to pass these exams and make sure that their voices are never heard by these politicians. But third of all, we think that this is going to gatekeep knowledge, right? Recognizing in current status quo, there's also an unequal distribution of resources in education, right? We think that in comparison, when you have state-of-the-art technology in schools in Jakarta, you have barely enough light and barely enough pencils in the more rural areas, right? We think that this is only going to justify voter suppression, understanding that the people who are unable to access education are probably the underprivileged people, right? These are the people in the most rural areas. These are people in areas that are not necessarily invested in heavily by the government, right? These people are not going to pass the exams, noticing that they don't have the resources to do so. But second of all, they are the most vulnerable in society, right? For example, regarding how they want their only land to be protected and to not be used for example, coal mining and all these other things. The only way they can make sure that their interests are protected are through voting, right? Because they cannot access all these other things like judicial review and all these other complicated things in the current status quo. So we shouldn't take that agency away from them, right? But lastly, people know best, right? People are not going to be easily swayed by rhetorics and all these other things, exactly because people live off basic survival skills and will prioritize their needs, right? For example, workers will want, for example, better wages and better worker protection, right? But maybe university students like us probably want better quota for internet so that we can ensure that there's a safe remote learning. Think, wink. But lastly, right, we think that people are going to grow with experience. It's not going to be that bad. With time and with more experience, people are going to be able to discern the flowery, beautiful lip service from genuine policies that are going to help the people, right? We think that we are also going to be able to check the precedents of candidates in political parties through the internet. It's not impossible. We think that it's possible for us to achieve a better democracy. Proud to oppose.